I'm going to start today with a question you probably already know the answer to. Which country is the world's largest movie producer? I know that you know that. It's not the United States, but instead, it's India. We've all heard about Bollywood movies. Now the question is, why are Indian movies so popular? Why does the US have such a hard time selling movies in India? Sure, every country has their own local movie industry. But when it comes to the box office, Hollywood blockbusters dominate the highest grossing films. India is an exception to this. Only 13% of the revenue made from the film industry in India comes from American movies. If you thought the answer is the huge Indian population, you'd better think again. Large though it is, India has more than 26 regional languages. In fact, when Indians talk about Bollywood, they're referring to the Hindi language film industry, which produces only about 20% of the total number of movies produced by the Indian film industry. The other 80% are made in the other regional languages: Bengali, Marathi, Tamil, and so on. Each language has its own industry with its own stars and studios. Despite these issues, in 2019 alone, India produced more than 2,200 movies. The Indian movie industry is so big and influential that it's even a political tool. This is what the former Indian Prime Minister Manmohan Singh once said about Indian movies.
Whenever I go in the Middle East, in Africa, people talk about Indian films. So that is a new way of influencing the world about the growing importance of India. Soft power is equally important in the new world of diplomacy. Manmohan Singh, former Prime Minister of India.
Indian movies are so influential that one single movie made Indian tourism to Spain grow 9.5% in 1 year. The movie was called Zindagi Na Milegi Dobara, Life Doesn't Come Again, and it was about 3 Indian guys taking a road trip to Spain. In fact, you know what is the world's biggest YouTube channel? It's not PewDiePie or in fact VisualPolitik, it's T-Series, a channel that broadcasts Bollywood visual clips. And make no mistake, Indian movies are getting more and more popular worldwide. China, despite the bad political relationship with India, is a huge consumer of Bollywood movies. But we'll talk about that a little later on. And by the way, unlike Hollywood studios, which are mainly located in a town called Hollywood on the outskirts of Los Angeles, there is no actual place called Bollywood. Nevertheless, you could say that most of the Hindi language movies are produced in one city, Mumbai, or as it used to be called, Bombay. Just like Los Angeles in the US, Mumbai is a thriving and cosmopolitan city with good weather all year round. The perfect place for making movies. But now, the question is, how did Indian movies become so popular? How did politics affect this industry? And why do the Chinese prefer watching Indian films over the latest Star Wars movie? Although, to be fair, the latest Star Wars movies weren't great. Today, we're going to answer all these questions. But first, let's take a look at some history.
It all began with Jesus Christ.
Yes, that's right. The year was 1911, and an Indian man named Dadasheb Phalake, I'm so sorry India, he took his family to watch a movie, The Life of Christ. Now remember that India was a British colony at the time, so the movies were mainly for the entertainment of the British colonizers. Nevertheless, Phalake was so mesmerized by the movie, he imagined that similar movies could be produced with personalities from Indian history and epics. So, Phalake travelled to London, learned filmmaking, came back to India, secured funding, and produced Raja Harishchandra. It was India's first homegrown feature film. It was a 40-minute silent film about a king from Hindu mythology and was screened for the public at Coronation Cinema in Mumbai in 1913. Over the next decade or so, several silent films were produced in India. Initially, they were based on Indian mythology, but soon the plots made way for adaptations of novels. And then, in 1931, India's first movie with audio, or talkie, was produced. It was Ardeshir Irani's Alam Ara. The concept was so fascinating for the people that it was reported that police had to control the crowds that went berserk at Mumbai's cinema theatre. Even before independence, India made its debut in Cannes in 1946 when the film Neecha Nagar won the Palme d'Or, or the Best Film Award. It paved the way for social realism in Indian cinema, and what followed was the golden age period of Indian cinema following independence, when movies addressed societal issues and working class conditions. Sentiments of the anti-colonial struggle of the previous decade were reflected through cinema. Later, in the 70s and 80s, filmmakers explored the genre of action films and urban noir, and from then, we jumped to the 90s, when films revolved around traditional family values. The film industry was flourishing, but there was one problem. The Indian movie industry was not recognised as an industry by the government. And remember, this is India, a heavily state-centric economy. Not being recognised by the government means producers couldn't get finance from any banks or financial institutions. Of course, it wasn't illegal, but it was marginalised by the political and economic system. So, what happens when a whole industry is forced to operate outside of the banks and the institutions? We're going to take a look at that now.
When Bollywood went underworld.
By the 1990s, organised crime had a prominent presence in Mumbai, but their sources of income, except narcotics, were dwindling. Meanwhile, Bollywood was growing to be a lucrative business, and the underworld wanted a slice of the film industry's pie. Besides, the producers needed to make films with higher budgets so they could remain competitive against foreign movies. So yes, many movies in the 1990s were funded by gangsters. And as you can imagine, dealing with gangsters is not great business. Do you want an example? Of course you do, so here's one. The Dubai-based gangster Abu Salem was threatening filmmaker Subhash Ghai for the foreign distribution rights of his hit film Pardes. Eventually, the police foiled an attack by Salem's hit squad. To understand the gravity of the situation, let me say that Salem is now serving a life sentence in India in connection with the 1993 bomb blasts in Mumbai that left 257 people dead. Filmmakers such as Rakesh Roshan, Mahesh Bhatt and Boney Kapoor, I'm so sorry India, all reported that they received calls from the mafia demanding profit sharing. Meanwhile, the mafia would threaten successful actors to sign on to star in films where they had vested financial interests. Other times, mafia dons would intimidate filmmakers to cast their lovers. For example, in 1995, a movie director called Javed Sadiq was shot dead because he didn't want to cast a gangster's lover in a movie. The relationship between organised crime and movies was so pervasive, it even appeared on WikiLeaks.
Elite US diplomatic cable has said that Bollywood welcomed funding from gangsters and politicians, known in India as black money. Economic Times.
But the real turning point came with, do you remember T-Series, the world's biggest YouTube channel? So that channel belongs to T-Series, one of the biggest music and film producers in India. Its founder was Gulshan Kumar. In 1997, he was shot dead by one of India's most notorious drug dealers, Dawood Ibrahim. This man, by the way, is the suspected mastermind of the 1993 Mumbai bombing. With this killing, many other cases came to light, which once had been an open secret, quickly became a #1 priority for the police. After so many decades, the government decided to change their views on movies.
Bollywood hazy about new industry status, but expects business to get streamlined now. India Today, 1998.
In 1998, the film industry finally got the status of a formal industry under the purview of the central and state governments. A slew of changes follows. In the year 2000, the Industrial Development Bank Act opened the doors for the film industry to access legitimate financing, and the union budget doled out tax incentives. Large banks, as well as corporations, were keen to invest in this sector. India's telecom giant Reliance and the TV content producer UTV all expanded their business to include film production. As film financing became less risky, the industry reliance on underworld money abated, though the threats of extortion did not stop entirely. As recently as 2015, about 10 members of mafia don Ravi Pujari's gang were arrested and later convicted of allegedly comprising to kill filmmaker Mahesh Bhatt. But enough of the drama. So far, we know that movies became an industry in their own right in India, but we still haven't answered the key question in this video. So let's move on to that right now.
Why are Indian movies so popular?
As we said at the beginning, Bollywood refers to the Hindi language films in India, but there are many other Bollywoods, and sometimes they can even surpass the original one. For example, in 2012, there were 262 films in Tamil, the language spoken in cities like Chennai, and just 221 in Hindi. Actually, the movies shot in the Telugu language have been increasing a lot in recent years. But all these different industries have one thing in common. They all experienced a turning point when they were recognized by the government. In just 10 years, the number of certified movies has nearly doubled thanks to easier financing. In 2009, there were 1,279 films produced in India. In 2019, there were more than 2,400. And also, movies have improved dramatically, at least in terms of budget. And regional language film production has recently expanded to encompass languages such as Nagamese, Manipuri, and Chhattisgarhi. I'm so sorry, India. While regional language movies continue to remain popular, Hindi movies are gaining more and more market share. In 2009, Bollywood or Hindi language films accounted for about 18% of all movies made in India, and just about 19% of the revenue. But a decade later, the percentage share of the number of movies has gone up only slightly to 21%, but these films account for 40% of the revenue. Regional language films still enjoy 47% of the revenue, but here's the real question. Why do Hollywood and other movie producers represent as little as 13%? The answer, as always, is complex, but we're going to tell you. The First reason is censorship. International as well as Indian films have to deal with India's censors. But unlike other countries that censor movies, the Indian rules are completely unpredictable. They depend on who's in the government at that particular point in time. For example, there was a time when sex and intimacy were forbidden to be shown in a movie. So anytime there was an erotic scene, there was lots of flowers covering it. Do you remember that scene from the Titanic where Kate Winslet appears naked? Indians missed that. Sorry, India, but for a different reason this time. But now, the censorship rules are focused on geopolitics. This explains why, in 2018, scenes mentioning maps of Kashmir and Mission Impossible were censored when the movie was screened in India. Of course, if you are a Bollywood producer, your movies are made to meet all the censorship laws, but many American movies are screened without some scenes that are crucial to understanding the plot. But wait a minute, because this is not the only reason. In many countries, movie ticket pricing is more or less consistent. The ticket costs the same regardless of the movie you are watching. India is a totally different ballgame. Tickets are priced dynamically, so you don't pay the same if you want to watch an imported movie as if you want to watch a locally made one. In fact, ticket prices can be different even for the same movie, depending on the choice of seats or even the time of day. But hold on, because we are not done yet. As we said before, India has lots of different languages, many of which I butchered just pronouncing. Many of them, understandably, are not understandable from one another. So dubbing a movie only in Hindi won't work for the whole Indian market. I know what you're going to be thinking now. Being so successful, the Indian movie industry must be a great business, right? Well, not really. In 2019, the entire movie industry had a revenue of $13.3 billion and the movie industry employed over 200,000 people. And you might be thinking, aren't those big numbers? Well, as a comparison, the movie Avengers Endgame made $2.79 billion on its own. And here is the craziest part of this story. You might think Indians are huge fans of going to the movies, but in fact, screen penetration in this country is way below the average. There are only about 6.5 movie screens per million people. This indeed varies across the country, but compare it to 23 in China and 126 in the US. Plus, India has massive piracy problems, which reportedly cost the industry over $260 million in losses every year. And while the ticket prices have been rising, they are still much lower than in the West. Of course, many of these trends are starting to change because of the video-on-demand services like Netflix. But ticket sales are not the only way that the industry makes money. If you've watched Indian movies, you know that music and choreographed dance sequences are often an integral part of these films. An important revenue source for production houses is through selling music rights and revenue sharing agreements, usually with one of the big labels like T-Series, Z Music, or Sony Music. In fact, the money earned by selling rights to the official soundtrack is used as seed capital for film production. And one platform where music streaming is incredibly popular is YouTube. And that is why T-Series is such a huge channel. Yes, even bigger than VisualPolitik. The revenue earned by the film industry through music is estimated at over $200 million. And some 5,000 jobs in the film industry can be attributed to the music department, which is nearly a third of all jobs in the recorded music industry. Okay, so this is the business side of the industry. But now we need to get to the political side of it. Because trust me, this is India. There is a political side to this story.
From Bollywood to the rest of the world.
So now I'm going to ask you a question. Have you ever seen an Indian movie? If you're watching this from the US, Australia, or Europe, chances are you probably haven't. You might think Indian movies are made for Indians only, but you'd better think again. For example, Russians really love their Bollywood films. During the 1950s, both India and the Soviet Union shared a common aversion to Western colonial powers, and there began the love story between Bollywood and Russia. In 1951, Dharti Ke Lal, Children of Earth, was the first Indian film screened in Soviet theatres. The film presented a scathing view of the Bengal famine of 1943, and it was produced by IPTA, a left-wing theatre group. There was even an Indo-Soviet co-production entitled Pardes, Foreigner, in 1954. From there, some 300 films made their way to the Soviet Union until its collapse in 1991. And now, the audience for these films is estimated to be between 20 and 60 million.
Russia's romance with Raj Kapoor lives on 29 years after his death, The Hindu.
Even today, in Putin's Russia, the state-run television channel Domashny broadcasts Bollywood movies. Indian actor Raj Kapoor, whose film Awara, Vagabond, was a roaring success in the Soviet Union in the 60s, continues to evoke the nostalgia of an older generation of Russians. But it goes much further than Russia. There is also a large Indian diaspora around the world, and many Indian films have targeted this population. Going back to the 1990s, Yash Raj's film Dilwale Dulhania Le Jayenge focused on an Indian family living in the UK. I am so sorry, India. The movie was a phenomenal success, and the producer of this film received an award from the British Tourism Authority for promoting tourism in Britain. In fact, when former US President Barack Obama visited India in 2015, he attempted an iconic monologue from DDLJ.
señorita, bude, déjame. You know what I mean.
And one current Bollywood actor who has hit it big with audiences around the world is none other than the star of that movie, Shah Rukh Khan. But this movie is not only famous in India. Check this out.
Bollywood stars head to Morocco. Hindustan Times.
A whole contingent of Indian film personalities, including Shah Rukh Khan, attended the Marrakesh International Film Festival in Morocco, where they have a swarm of fans deeply passionate about Indian cinema. There, King Mohammed VI gave a national honour to Shah Rukh Khan. And I know what many of you might be thinking. If you are a loyal VisualPolitik fan, you've seen our videos where we talk about how the Muslim minorities are treated in India. You could say that Hindus and Muslims are not good friends. But again, when it comes to movies, it is a completely different story. In the Arab world, you can find TV channels such as Z Aflam that are dedicated to broadcasting Indian movies dubbed in Arabic. And do you remember Mr. Shah Rukh Khan? Check out where he is now.
Shah Rukh Khan becomes brand ambassador of Dubai, connected to India.
But that is not all. WikiLeaks, yes, US cables published by WikiLeaks, has suggested using Indian actors to counter extremism efforts in Afghanistan, where Indian films and actors are hugely popular. Even during the Taliban times, Indian movies were smuggled in on the black market. But wait a minute, because we are far from done. What is the biggest emerging market today? What is the market that every brand wants to get into? Of course, we're talking about China. Again, if you've been a VisualPolitik subscriber for a while, you know that China and India are not great friends. They often have skirmishes at the border. But then again, when it comes to movies, it's a completely different story. Check this out.
Dangal is nearing $150 million at China's box office. Forbes.
Dangal, an Indian wrestling drama starring Amir Khan, opened in 9,000 screens in China. This feat can, of course, be attributed to the filmmaker's conscious efforts to market the film in the neighbouring country. Amir went on a promotional tour of China before the film's release. Later, another film titled Secret Superstar made more money in China than Star Wars: The Last Jedi. Indian movies are competing head-to-head with American movies in the world's biggest market. So now the question is over to you. Will we see Indian movies dubbed into English or Spanish at some point? Will the Indian film industry become as influential as the US one? And will Indian people ever forgive me enough to let me come to your beautiful country? Please do. Leave your answers in the comments below. Don't forget, we always publish brand new videos every week, so subscribe to VisualPolitik and hit the bell button so you won't miss any posts. If you like this video, give us a thumbs up, and as always, I'll see you next time.
And if you want to learn more about politics and hear even more of my lovely voice, you can join us at Reconsider Media. We have a podcast at reconsidermedia.com/podcast. See you there.